Welcome to Fortify Your Future, a podcast for professionals who currently have executive oversight of or aspirations of leading the safety and security function for their organization. I'm your host, Ken Carrasco, and joining me on the podcast today is Carlos Galvez Jr. Carlos is a seasoned and strategic security executive with nearly 30 years of experience spanning corporate security, law enforcement, and emergency medical services. As one of the few Hispanic executives to ascend to senior leadership roles in the security field at publicly traded company, Willis has built a career defined not only by operational excellence, but also by his people-first approach to protection and leadership. Carlos, welcome and thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me to be on.
No, I'm glad to have you on. We've known each other for many years, and I'm really excited to have you on today. You know, the way I look at things, what's really important to me, and you know that I'm an advocate of is really with leading with value. So what's one thing that you could articulate to our audience today that they can take away as actionable and something that'll be beneficial for them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I can help with providing value for your listeners and anyone who comes across this, Ken, is offering them time to have some one-on-one time to talk about their career, what their aspirations are, how I can help. I definitely don't have all the answers, but I can share my perspective, especially with folks that might identify with or align with what we're about to get into, and that's the way I came up through the profession, which was, started at the bottom as a uniform security guard wearing that polyester uniform, and 28 years ago. So it's been, as you said, we've known each other for decades, and you've known most of my ride. So one of the things that I would really love to share with folks and provide value through is listening and again sharing some perspective and guidance on how they could potentially avoid some of the pitfalls that I had to experience and challenges, and know that there are opportunities, and it's not just a matter of being at the right place in the right time. It's a matter of how we create our own opportunities and how we advocate for ourselves. I think that's one of the biggest things that, in retrospect, 28 years later, if I would have known 28 years ago, I probably would have achieved that executive level either faster or at many other different places.
Yeah, no, that's great, and really appreciate that. And I'll provide a link to your LinkedIn profile in the description information for this podcast, so people can connect with you and take advantage of that one-on-one opportunity. I know I've done that myself with you over the years, and always provided great advice and guidance for me. No matter how seasoned you are, I think the key thing is looking at being open to different perspectives, and you've had quite the career here. And so can you talk to us a little bit about and going a little bit deeper in your career path, because you've been in so many different opportunities that have allowed you to develop as a professional. Talk to us about your career path and what that's meant to you, over the course of 30 years, and how, folks can sort of look at you and look at some of the things that you've done, and perhaps take away some real world, actionable guidance that you've been able to learn and discover and benefit from.
Sure. And Ken, I know you and we've had plenty hours on the phone together over the years in supporting each other. So likewise, I appreciate the support you've given me over the years. Having someone that you can call when you're making these types of decisions on what's next, right? What are the next steps? Kind of trying to understand the risks involved. And I think if I were to sum it up, that's probably one of the things that I've been pretty open with as far as taking risks, right? And going from corporate to the vendor side, right? Or going to a specialized role like I did when you and I worked together at Cisco and focusing specifically on executive protection after having been a generalist for several years, right? So, for me, I think it's a matter of understanding what's the end goal, right? Where do we want to be? I like to think that at the time I was making those decisions and taking those risks, that I knew that the outcome would be that I'd be a well-rounded, security professional with understanding on the vendor side, on specialized roles like EP, which are all responsibilities that someone that is heading up corporate security for a organization needs to understand and have a grasp of. So I think it worked out that way. There were probably some hints of and a little bit of me sort of having a strategy or roadmap to achieve that. But again, I think it was a lot through just happenstance, and it all kind of fell together. And again, that it worked out well for me. It's been a great ride for the last 28 years, but I'd love to be able to make sure that others can actually have a roadmap that they can follow and execute against. My career has been, a little unorthodox as far as what I've been able to accomplish. Not typical profile, right? As far as someone who has been in the roles I've been in, no former, federal level law enforcement, no three-letter agency experience. I was a police officer. I was a reserve police officer, which I'm extremely proud of because that was something I wanted to do ever since I was a kid, and was able to accomplish. Actually, was going through the academy while we were working together, and was able to get on board and did 8 years with an agency here in Northern California as a reserve, which gave me a lot of insight and experience in what law enforcement officers have to deal with. I think that was sort of unique in that a lot of times it's not common that you're working in law enforcement and corporate security at the same time, right? It's either one or the other. The cycle I'm familiar with is a lot of folks like me, you start that entry level security work and you want to put yourself through school. And once you're able to apply for an agency, you jump on board with them, you do your time, you retire out. If you have the inclination to do so, you pick up a new role and a new life and a new career in corporate security or on the private sector. I sort of did. I did them both at the same time, right? And that was, I think, one of the unique things about my background was being able to do both at the same time. The other thing is, again, I not coming from or having that particular profile. One of the things that I think was beneficial there was when you're working with a group of folks that have a specific background or experience or profile, there's sort of just that perspective, right? And there's no diversity of perspective. And I think you and I worked on together, where there's some of that, right? Where everyone's former whatever, and that's the way they view things through. And having just grown up in tech or providing corporate security in the tech environment, I think there were, the understanding of culture, the understanding of having to be an enabler, has always been part of what I do, right? So it's not something I had to learn on the job or learn the hard way as I progressed through my career.
Yeah, you mentioned, the pathway or the roadmap, right? And this is something that I've been trying to put my head around in terms of developing sort of a comprehensive training program for those that are aspiring to be leaders, because nothing really exists today, right? We see different types of schools that address executive protection or investigations, or there's even things that you can follow relative to security operations and security systems, but nothing really that addresses leadership in particular, or individuals that are pursuing security management, right? Unless they're internal programs through vendors and those sorts of programs that are very specific to those companies. So you mentioned roadmap. I know that there are things that you do from a training perspective and certain pillars that you use foundationally. Can you talk about some of those things? Because I think it's so important to have structure and to have some sort of basis to begin to build off of what that leadership foundation should at least look at from maybe a macro level, or some ideas of what do I need to focus in on this that are going to be most important as I begin my career in this, or for those seasoned leaders that are still much like you and I, as we had gone through, it was sort of, we learned as we went along, and on the job was sort of, how we naturally progressed in terms of the things that we were exposed to, and a lot of peer consulting that we had done, and learned from others just by sheer being exposed to people that had a little bit more years under their belt. So can you talk a little bit about any type of model or structure that you use today, or train on, that would be helpful?
Yeah, you know, I don't remember the exact timing, but it must have been well over a decade ago, probably closer to two. I was asked to be the keynote speaker at one of the local ASIS events. I think it was a Security Officer Recognition Day, and that was sort of the catalyst to developing what I've dubbed NLB, right? It stands for networking, leadership style, and personal branding. And one of the things that so those three pillars, right? I think as I reflected and I put something together for that event, I thought about what were the things that were important to me at the time, and they've stood the test of time, and still are I believe critical pillars to developing yourself, and more on the soft skill side, right? I think to your point, yes, there's a ton of training out there that's available, but most of it is tactical, right? It doesn't really hone in on leadership skills, soft skills, right? That are probably as important, if not more important, when you're in a leadership role or leading a function, security function at an organization, right? Because everything we do is through collaboration and influence. And if you don't have the right soft skills, and you and I've worked with folks and seen folks that just haven't understood the value of that, right? Or haven't placed enough emphasis on those things. So, for me, it was that the networking piece is like the way you and I first met, right? It wasn't through knowing each other from having worked together in, some other life or school, or having grown up in the same, even though I think we did grow up in the same town, having grown up in, in that sense, it was through networking, right? And I don't remember the exact way it was, but I know it was through networking. And I think I reached out to you because I was at Juniper at the time. You were at Cisco, and even though they were rivals, right, we still looked at it as partnering together when it came to our profession. And I think we did some benchmarking. So I think that networking piece is huge, right? And it's also challenging at the same time because there's a level of networking that happens where there's no shortage of social media influencers in our industry, right? That it's all about the likes and getting their image and likeness out there. But then there's also the personalities in our industry, right? It sort of makes it difficult also to connect with folks and develop these types of relationships, right? So I think understanding the value of networking, and to just share a cliche phrase, right? As they say, your network is your net worth, right? So really understanding and knowing that as I look back at my career, my network has probably gotten me 80% of my job, work and jobs and opportunities. So, those are there should be a heavy emphasis placed on that. And even it's not just about searching for the next opportunity. It's also, again, as I mentioned, sharing information in our industry. It's about how do we get things done, right? And getting those things done is by knowing someone that knows someone that's trusted in any part of the world that can help you with an issue, right? So that's one pillar. The next one is leadership style, right? I again, I tell folks, and when I share this training is you probably learn more from shitty leaders than you do great leaders, right? And because most of us understand and know that great leaders are going to behave in a certain way, and we expect that. And I think combining what you learn from both and creating your own style is what I advocate for. Taking a leadership style off the shelf, like, servant leader, or, any one of those other styles is I think a good starting point, but really understanding what you want your leadership identity to be is key. And then, developing your personal brand, right, is equally as important, internally and externally, to your role, right? Internally, is it, or when you say you're going to do something, do you do it, right? And do you do it on time? Do you deliver it the way you had committed to? Externally, right, is if you sign up for things and you're going to help and do something. For example, right, the example that stands out in my mind right now is when you volunteer for things, right, with your local chapter, for example, of ASIS, like I do and have been for the last 22 years. And I bring it up, and I should have prefaced all of this by saying these three pillars are things that I've not perfected yet, right? And I still have not perfected, and I still continue to grow and develop in those three areas of myself, professionally and personally. So, I don't want the audience to think that I'm standing here and saying, that you, those are the three things because I've perfected them. No, those are the three things because I know they've worked for me, and I know I need to continue working on them, right? So, that personal branding, and I bring that up because I remember that is important, because I was not great at that, right? Especially when I first started volunteering for things. I was the guy that would have volunteered but not actually deliver and show up, right? So, I learned that, and I have folks in my who have been in my life that have called me out on that stuff, right? And it was really, at the time, it stung and it sucked, but in retrospect, it was one of those pivotal moments where it helped me understand and recognize, right, that I needed to change that aspect. So again, networking, leadership style, personal branding. I know the personal branding starts with the P, but there is NLP, which is, I think, neuro linguistic programming, which is a whole different thing. So I went with NLB. And again, I think you started off the podcast with, and I know you start off all your podcasts with, what's something of value that we can provide, and that is something, right, I'm happy to go through with someone one-on-one. I'm happy to provide, you know, um, sort of that framework and roadmap for someone who's interested in doing that, Ken.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's great information, and for those that need some guiding light, right? Need a North Star to begin with, to say, look, these are some things that I can pursue and follow and focus in on, right? To start that process, because I think you and I have both learned that it's something that comes over the course of a long career, a long time. You've always been a person that I've looked to for continuous learning, right? It's one of those things that I really admire about you, is that you continue to develop yourself. You continue to look for opportunities to develop yourself and challenge yourself, as you've gone along throughout your entire career. And I think there's a very strong lesson in that I think the broader community needs to embrace and understand, because so much of what we do is understanding how to adapt. And the only way you're really going to be effective is to continue to skill build as we continue to learn new things. So that's incredibly useful. So thank you for that. Now, Carlos, let me ask you this. At this stage in your career, as you're progressing forward, what is top of mind for you? Where does your passion lie at this point? I mean, you've reached sort of the pinnacle of what we look at in terms of career growth, right? Getting to the top, being a VP, in an organization, being the number one at an enterprise level. What's next for you as you continue to focus and develop and provide value to folks? What is something that's important to you that you're looking forward to continuing to build and develop?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ken. And yes, one of the very few, in particular, Latinos, right, that have reached that type of role within an organization, within a publicly traded company that I'm aware of. Anecdotally, there's no statistics, right, that at least I've found, but anecdotally, as you go through and you see who's who and you're at events and you meet, ever since I was just starting off in this career, right, I remember being one of the only ones that looked like me in the room, right, where everyone else just had a different, it was a different demographic. I'll put it that way. So, one of the things that uh, is important to me now, and again, just to be clear, I think the pinnacle for me personally, right? I think I've shared this with you, would be my dream job would be the CSO of Disney, right? And that's the pinnacle for me. So just wanted to put that out there in the universe. But again, I think there's this tendency for organizations to think that they need a higher particular profile, right? And those profiles are not mine. Those are very different profiles. So for me, it's bringing awareness around what the value is of diverse backgrounds and upbringings. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely recognize the value and understand that there are transferable skills of folks that have led previous careers and lives in certain professions. But I think just like you and I can't, because we've done 20, 30 years in private security, corporate security, decide that we want to go be the chief of police or the special agent in charge of whatever tomorrow, right? That doesn't happen. So I don't know what developing your skills and being able to be an effective corporate security leader does not happen overnight, right? Again, I would argue that even 28 years in, and I count my years as a uniform polyester wearing uniform guard, right? Because that is
Sure.
part of what you're going to have to be responsible for, right? In some enterprise organizations, it's probably the largest piece and largest line item within their budget, right? So, not understanding the challenges and not understanding the plight of the folks that are in those roles, I think is a significant blind spot, right? For folks that just kind of are able to go into immediate leadership roles. And again, I understand that, there is those transferable skills, but I wish that there was an opportunity for folks to just understand a little more that corporate security is not just about, you know, the old phrase of guards, gates, and cameras, right? It's much more than that, and it's more about, as I mentioned earlier, the at those levels, it's about those soft skills, and it's about influencing. It's about understanding what is the business intending, what industry are you in, what's the threats and risks to that industry, what's your leadership, what's the risk tolerance and appetite for your leadership team, right? Not all founders, executives, CEOs, whatever executive level you want to talk about, they're not all created equally, right? As far as their risk tolerance goes. And depending on the maturity of the organization, they may be less inclined or more inclined to take on certain risks that some folks that are conditioned or have been conditioned or used to, dealing with threats or risks in a certain way don't understand that when they get that no, that doesn't mean no, stop focusing on it. That means no, we're not ready to do that now, but having a plan in your back pocket for when it's ready to go, right? So for me, it's how do we, it's not just about the person that's looking to get to this level over the next 10, 15 years. It's how do we help folks that are going into those types of roles because they have plenty of experience in a different profession and are going into these roles. How do we help them understand that, right? So for me, it's the next 15, 20 years, right? After 28 years of doing this, I want to focus on how do we help individuals achieve that. And one of the things I've been working on and I've shared with you is Vamos, which is an organization that I'm working to stand up that is focused on primarily serving underrepresented demographics achieve leadership roles within the security profession. Um, Vamos roughly translates to in English, let's go, right? And that's what it's all about, right? It's let's go in that direction, whatever that, whatever that challenge or next role is that you want to do. I want to be able to help build folks' capability, skills, and confidence, right? Really, I know a ton of people that think they can't do it because of whatever, right? Imposter syndrome, whatever it is, which I've personally have suffered from a lot. But I think the challenge is unless you've seen someone that you can relate to, right, and to some degree, you're not going to be able, you may not believe that it's possible to achieve. So I think developing the next wave of leaders, again, not specific to one demographic, but just underrepresented demographics is what I want to focus on for the next 15, 20 years.
No, that's great, Carlos. I think, part of the challenge I had in my own career was much like yourself, in that, as you scan the room of your peers, you just were not used to seeing anyone that looked similar to you, to me, and there were no bridges for us, right, to follow, to cross, and didn't really have individuals that assisted us through, our careers during those periods of time. So I think, again, it's vitally important, right? How you go about building those bridges and making them available, and the opportunities available to people that want to become qualified in these areas, and prepare themselves accordingly, right? It's not just about providing a pathway for underrepresented groups, but it's about providing the education, the training, the skill set to develop them to become what they can be. And I think that's key in all of this. As I look at other models, other organizations, it begins most often with education, right? And what can we do in that space to help individuals in those demographic areas that we're trying to assist with the education piece. And I know you and I have had different paths, but in the same way, we've done things in similar fashions. In that, I started my corporate career before I finished my education, and I only got to the junior college level, right? I had graduated from De after I was hired at Cisco, right? So, and then it was a matter of, continuing that and trying to build, and having the time and energy and effort to pursue that. And I didn't finish my undergrad. I came close, but I didn't actually finish it. And so it's one of those things, as we went through our past, sometimes those things didn't materialize for one reason or another. And it's not that I have a lot of regret in that, but I do believe there's certain things that, uh, by accomplishing or finishing those things, it's one less what I refer to as an excuse to give somebody for not providing you an opportunity, right? And
Yeah.
I would love to hear your thoughts about that in terms of education and following through, and those sorts of things, as you've looked at your career and what you've done. Because I looked at it and I compensated by developing in other ways, or educating myself in other ways, in order to be effective and deliver results. What are some of the things that you looked at as you progressed and went through, and as it applies to education? And is that a big component of what you think you need to do in terms of building these bridges?
Absolutely. And again, I think this is that paradox, right? Where a similar background, right? I just actually recently, I'm looking over at my diploma that's sitting on my counter. I recently just graduated with my junior college, right? My AS degree. And it's not because I didn't recognize the value of education. It's just when I started working First W-2 job was probably at 16, but I've been working since as far back as I can remember, right? 10, 12, working at, with my dad, had painting company, doing all sorts of just things, always hustling, always moving, right? And one of the things was, a lot of that was out of necessity, right? Financial necessity. And even after, I finished high school, um, I remember working at the time, 60, 80-hour weeks, right? As a security guard, you got this, 18-year-old kid that, again, comes from very, um, modest, background, and having the ability to make the money I was making right at that age, thinking it was a lot. I prioritized that over, continuing my education, right? I still went and took classes here and there, but again, the focus became, money, right? The focus became the professional development. So absolutely believe it's critical and important. To this day, I continue to take classes. I'm actually, studying at, Sacramento State. So, it's one of those things that I know I need to finish. It's more about, it's more for personal reasons than it is professional reasons at this point for me. Um, I'm fortunate to have worked with and for people that understand the value but don't place a significant amount of weight on that accomplishment, right? I'm not going to minimize people's accomplishments by just calling it a piece of paper, which, some folks view that as, right, is just kind of checking a box. And in some respect, I actually appreciate the fact that it's played out the way it has for me, because I now take classes that and focus on things that actually interest me, right? And I excel at those things. The GPAs that I've had, as an adult, are way more impressive than when I was, a kid, right? So, one of the things that I think is important, though, is understanding that some of the smartest people, including yourself, are folks that I've worked with that have very little to no formal post, high school education, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not advocating that that's the path. Everyone has their own path, and I think that's what's important to note here is that, and as a hiring manager, right, and as a leader, for me, I think I think it's silly in this day and age where you see hard requirements of, not just a, a 4 year. I've seen, entry level, manager level jobs that are looking for, graduate degrees, right? In our industry, right? Not a different specialized, or different industry, I should say, right? But, I think one of the challenges is we have to understand people's journeys, right? And understand why that wasn't something that was probably, available to them, right? Or did they develop the skills in in particular technical skills that are needed through on the job, right? And if that's the case, I don't, again, I don't see why someone shouldn't be considered. I worked for organizations that I think are pretty, um, they draw a pretty hard line in the sand when it comes to that requirement. Amazon being one of them, right? I didn't have even a 2 year degree when I got hired there, right? And worked for them full time. I had to go through the process, did, a writing sample and all that. And, got hired there as a senior manager, which, for me, was, an indication that luckily the person that was the hiring manager recognized and understood that, it's not just about that, educational accomplishment. It's about, beyond that, what's this person bringing to the table, right? And I was able to demonstrate that. At first, the writing sample was, again, it was a first for me, and sort of a pain in the butt, but I think that's what ultimately proved, right, that regardless of credentials, right, that the capability existed in me to be able to deliver what they were looking for.
Oh man, that's
So
good.
Yeah. So on the personal side, right? My son just graduated from high school last year, right? And daughter's going into sophomore year, and then we got a younger one. But I want them to understand that even though I didn't, I would love for them to be able to, and they have all the resources that they need to be able to accomplish that, right? They're not in a position where they have to do anything other than what they choose to do, and I'll be supportive of whatever that decision is, but I would love for them to continue their education beyond high school.
Great, great. Yeah, no, it's certainly something that it does come up. People talk about this, especially those who are entering, this industry and wondering what are the things that I need to get. Do I need a 4-year degree? Do I need to get my CPP or some other sort of certifications? And I think, there's no sort of standard way of getting into the industry or progressing through the industry. I think there's a lot of takeaways from different career paths, and there's so many different people that come from different areas that have their sort of uniqueness and nuances. So it's really helpful to hear and listen to others' paths and how our audience can relate or connect with certain things in terms of challenges that you've experienced or things that you've done, decisions that you've made, but you were still able to accomplish what you have accomplished, over the course of your career. Um, any closing thoughts? Any last bit of guidance or advice that you could give to someone who's aspiring to be a leader in particular in the safety and security function?
Yeah, Ken, I wasn't going to include this as part of my response to that question, but one of the things that you talked about on the education and you included was certifications, right? My view on certifications has always been that they validate, they don't educate, right? So I think that there's sometimes a lot of misplaced focus on, well, if I get this certification, that means I can do the job. Maybe, right? But I think there's also a lot of folks that are really great at retaining information and can study materials and then go take a test and pass the certification exam. So I think understanding that, yes, you may be able to get a certification, but really learn what the domains are, right? And can you master those domains? I think is the intent of certifications is it certifies that you know what you're doing in that space, right? Not just able to retain information that you've learned. Not saying don't pursue them, it's just pursue them with the interest of wanting to validate what you've learned versus wanting to learn what you need to validate, right? So my closing thoughts are if you want to accomplish a leadership role in our profession is learn the soft skills, right? Yes, you absolutely, depending on, what type of area you want to lead in within our profession, there are absolutely going to be technical skills, right? There's things I don't know about physical security systems and technology that, I just don't have a lot of interest in. So that's not an area where I'm gonna lean too heavily in, right? So for me, it's is understand what areas you want to develop and grow in, but always, and even if they're technical in nature, always focus on the NLB pillars, right? And really understand that even as a technical leader, you're still going to have to get buy-in from the other functions within the organization you're going to be dependent on, right, to get your work done. Most of us understand and recognize that security is a cost center, it's not a revenue generator. So we need to be able to demonstrate. We have the unlucky position of having to demonstrate our value more than a revenue generating function does, right? So making sure that we demonstrate what that value is to a particular organization, that's a skill, right? Like being able to show cost avoidance, right? And show and measure how a loss didn't occur because of the programs that you've created and implemented at an organization. making sure that you understand and are seeking input, feedback, and requirements from your stakeholders. I think those are, again, those aren't technical skills per se. Those are soft skills that we need to learn and understand, that our function cannot be successful or even survive within an enterprise that when we don't partner and collaborate with the folks that not only are making decisions, but that we have interdependencies with and could go to bat for us, right? When you have your head of um, operations speaking for your function in a executive meeting and how important it is to their ability to be able to deliver on their business model, I think that speaks volumes, right, for our industry. So making sure that you understand the business that you're in, the industry you're in, not the security industry, but the security, I'm sorry, the industry that you're working for, i.e., financial, manufacturing, whatever that is, really understanding how that organization makes its money, right? The what contributes to their revenue and what can impact that revenue stream is really important. So that and again the soft skills is really where I think folks need to focus on. And that soft skill more than anything is collaboration, right, with your stakeholders and your partners, and understanding where you fit in within the larger picture of the organization.
Well, hey, Carlos, great conversation. Always enjoy talking with you. Really appreciate you being on the episode today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Love what you're doing. Keep doing it, and I'll be following every episode.
Will do. Thanks, man.